welcome to the roundtable discussion of our podcast. The video will be available on YouTube. The video will contain images from the book in question. I have with me here Steve Hoveke, who is the co-founder of Printed in Blood and the host of the Cinemental Podcast. Hello, Steve.
Hey, Dennis, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
So, as you know, we are discussing what is properly pronounced as Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Unless you're Anthony Hopkins and it's Dracula.
Dracula. The film released in the early 90s, and our focus today, we'll talk about the film a little bit, because I'm sure you have your point of view on the film, but we're going to focus today on the graphic comic book adaptation, which is somewhat graphic, by Roy Thomas and Mike Mignola. And as I'm an artist, I'm probably going to be fair, I'm probably going to speak to the art more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lovely interview a few days ago with Jim Salicrup, who was the editor of the book. And I'm hoping that we might get an interview with Mike at some point. But let's start by just, Steve, I'm going to just ask you, what do you think of the movie in general?
You know, it's funny, when I recently reread the graphic novel, when you had asked me to jump on this with you, and I'll be honest, I don't think I've seen it start to finish since it came out.
Wow.
So there was, I know the Bram Stoker Dracula story fairly well. And so when I reread this, there was a lot that I had actually kind of forgotten about.
Mm-hmm.
And in my own research about the comic itself, I feel that it's structurally pretty accurate to what I remember from the novel. And
I would say so.
So rereading it was fun because it was really fun to revisit. The visuals obviously are very well known, and there's no point in the reading of the graphic novel where I couldn't picture everyone and all the actors in place anyway. So it was fun. It was literally like revisiting the film while reading this.
Yeah, I think actually in some ways, because I do revisit the film probably every Halloween or around that period of time. This was a seminal film for me. I was in college or just coming out of college. My ex-wife Kristen Sora, the brilliant illustrator who you know and are friends with, as well as I am also friends with, my girlfriend at the time, she won the red foil cover. You remember at the time, variant covers were the rage.
All the rage.
So they printed a really nice red foil printed cover of the version, and she won it in the mail, and to this day will not give it to me. She said, "I'm like, you didn't even want it." She's like, "It's mine." And that's just the way that it is.
That's right.
The only thing I lost in the divorce that I regret is that. Anyway, the book. So to me, it was a seminal book because Mike was also an artist very much in, I would say, flux. He was I got some images up, and
sure.
I think if you can see, you see the world of Krypton there.
Yeah.
I'm just making sure.
The thing with Mike's work, and this is from evolutionary speaking, just over the years, I was a tremendous fan of Cosmic Odyssey. And even before that, it's really fun to see his work with finishes by other inkers,
right?
When he's not doing his own finishes, and I always find it fun to see how much more stuff is added, because I know his pencils pretty well. And I remember his older stuff, and I've seen older pencils of his, and he was a little more detailed. He just gradually found that spot, that that look that he's so well known for. And it's always interesting to me. That's why I was interested when I saw the beginning of this. that the inks were done by John Nyberg,
Right.
and it still comes off looking very much like Mike. I think John did an
Sure.
excellent job capturing the way that Mike, and that might have been a conversation they had.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. I believe Jim actually mentioned that there was there was a conversation as often, more often than not, there is within an art team about how they're going to approach. And I believe the colors were by Mike Chiarello, and he, of course, is an amazing, as well as being a classic art director of
Sure.
DC fame, is an amazing artist in his own right and a great colorist. But Mike's evolution has always been very interesting to me, in particular because he began sort of as a fairly traditional comic book artist of the mid to late 80s.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say anything really to me stood super out. He did some fun stuff. I think the first thing that kind of hit my attention in terms of his evolution as an artist was probably his work on Rocket Raccoon,
Okay.
which I think he began to distort, the human form and the raccoon form, uh, extremely. And I once, and it was really shortly after that we got things like World of Krypton, where he would have like, people were 14-foot giants and just really expressive uses of shadow. Also, you began to see, whereas you see in this image from World of Krypton, there's still a lot of sort of rendering and sort of linear rendering. Whereas when you get to Cosmic Odyssey and Dracula, that's almost completely gone. It's really all 90% black and white with
Yeah.
a minimum bit of rendering, and he almost becomes, and I certainly don't mean to make this sound in any way pejorative, but he almost becomes more of a designer than a
Yeah.
pure. He's not interested in showing you that he knows how to draw a face or a hand super accurately, super naturalistically, or photorealistically. He wants to hit you with the idea of a hand, or hit you
The
with the
strength of
idea
an
of a
image.
face, with the strength of the entire image. And of course,
100%.
he had a lot to work with. Uh, to say that
He
the source
did, and you know
material.
it's funny. I was noticing especially in the early pages of in that first issue. It was really interesting to me to see how well he nailed likeness with so few lines and details. I mean, literally just with structure and shape and a couple of highlight lines, he was really able, especially in the first issue of the 4 issue mini, the shots of Mina,
Mhm.
Winona Ryder. There's a couple of shots in there that I mean, it's stunning how close he nailed her face with like 3 or 4 lines, and just the tiniest bit of shadow. Just some really great stuff. And his Anthony Hopkins rendering is great. His Gary Oldman look is good. Um, you know, uh, and I don't know if it's because I know the imagery so well that I'm able to extrapolate that in my own brain and look at it and kind of overlay automatically. My brain sort of making the fixes as we go. But I just feel like that some of this stuff is, he's really great at it, and I don't think he gets that recognition
Mhm.
because he does so much original stuff, and most of his work is based on stuff that either he's creating himself or not necessarily pulled from a person that people know.
Right.
And I think that his ability to do that with so few details is really amazing.
I mean, the late great John Paul Leon, who was, of course, a brilliant
Yeah.
artist in his own right, he once told me that he thought of Mignola's stuff as like surgery, like just so incredibly precise, so precise. And it's in the interview with Jim. But it's funny they mention it because apparently Winona Ryder was one of the actors that sort of was on top of the team for her likeness. So
Oh,
she felt very free to go in and say like, this doesn't really look like me. Because I don't know. It'll be interesting. I hope I get the opportunity to ask Mike in an interview if that was his focal point but yeah, but Mike, the ability to break down reality into a precise set of lines and tones is, such an incredible skill in its own right. But I also wanted to mention that, to give the movie its due, the movie is incredibly well designed, from costumes to set design and
Well,
to monster design.
and in the afterword in the graphic novel by the screenwriter Jim Hart, he mentions that Francis and Mike were very much in communication during the production, and Mike had input into some set design.
Yeah, apparently, and
which
apparently,
I find fascinating.
Yeah, it's not something that happened. But it's interesting because Coppola has always been a director that was very into, he has Steranko do a bunch of designs, Jim Steranko do a bunch of designs for this movie. He's for all accounts a comic book fan. Him and George Lucas is an avid fan of American illustration. Is going to be opening his own museum of the stuff soon. And the story that Jim told, and I'm going to repeat the story here briefly in case someone's just watching the YouTube video and doesn't want to actually listen to the podcast. Maybe will entice you to listen to the podcast. But apparently, Coppola asked Mike to come to a screening, and he thought that it would be just a screening for friends and family, and it would just be the movie and maybe some questions, and that would be it. But apparently, it was just him and George Lucas, and it was a screening for the two of them, and then the three of them had an extensive discussion about the film in progress and what could be changed. And Lucas famously suggested the climax of the film, which I think is deviates from the book, I think, in a good way. Right. And Mike had a lot of input into the visualization, but also, again, to go back to give the movie its due. The costume design's gorgeous. The background design is gorgeous. So, and the images that Mike gets to draw of Dracula in the blood red armor, muscle armor.
Yeah.
The physical armor is an incredible piece of work on its own. So,
sure,
to be able to literally and metaphorically draw from that is great, because you can't. It would be difficult to make it look not interesting. It would be. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you a question when you were finished. So, and you being much more familiar with the film, because having viewed it much more recently than I have, the question I would have is, so going through this, there were a couple of panels that stood out to me, and I'll point them out to you, and you can put them into the video later if you want.
That'd be great.
There's one very early on that really set the tone for me. And the graphic novel doesn't have page number, so I can't give you a page number, but it's at the bottom of a page, and it's right when Jonathan Harker first arrives to get picked up at Borgo Pass. And it's the bottom of a page on the left side, and he's standing there next to a sort of little hooded, almost like a signpost kind of thing, and the carriage is kind of moving away. On the right side.
I remember the panel, yeah.
And that to me just absolutely leapt off the page as just setting the tone for the whole thing for me. I just kind of stopped and looked at it for a minute, because his ability again to give you everything you need with an absolute minimum of actual line work and art.
Right.
Just is amazing, is stunning work. I mean, and there's that panel, and then there's one, and here's one I had a question about. Maybe you can answer this a little better for me. As I was going through this again, there were obviously very iconic stills and scenes from the film that stand out and that are represented here in the book very nicely. But overall, as you went through this, and again, this is a question because you've seen this more recently than I, how much of it, when you look through this, do you think was really pulled from actual scenes of the film? Because if he was involved so much at the early stages of not only design work but productions and that kind of thing, I find it fascinating to see was he drawing this like literally as they were making the film,
No. Oh, yes. I mean, no, yes. I can answer that. I can speak to that. The book was being illustrated, or at least during the film, or at least as the film was winding down.
Okay. His
Um,
production was
uh,
winding down.
yeah, and I'm sure he had access to, obviously many images from the film. But I find it very interesting because most comic book adaptations of this time, or really to this day, and I would handle this the same way as an artist. There are at least a few images that are taken directly from the film. Thinking about the wonderful adaptation of Empire Strikes Back by Al Williamson, where it's beautiful illustration, but and it's not a but. It's just he chose to represent at least certain images directly lifted from stills, drawn, reinterpreting it in his style. But I don't think, to be honest, having seen the movie recently and then looked through the comic book, I doubt that there's a single image in the book that's directly lifted from a still or from a frame from the movie. These to me seem like reinvented illustrations. Like he took the film, the set designs, the costume designs, the characters, the likenesses, and then said, okay, got it, and then reinterpret. This would be I'm guessing. This is a subjective guess, but my strong inclination is to believe that none of these images are. I'm looking, for example, I'm putting up an image of when during
The
the
intro.
the intro when the Christians are invading Constantinople,
Right.
they tear down the cross and or I'm sorry, it's the opposite, I think. No, tear down the cross. And you see Vlad Dracula hoist a man on a spear.
Yeah.
That image in the movie is a very lush, intricately lit combination of actors and models and backgrounds. And in the comic book, it's just a silhouette and some lines, and it's as impactful. It has as much impact, or
Yes.
maybe in some ways more impact, because it's such a distilled, it's such a distilled version of the moment. And I don't know, it would be interesting. It would have been interesting to have to talk to someone who reads the book and has never seen the film, and then watch the film and see um,
Yeah.
what their interpretation might be. But I think what you're saying, and I agree with it, is that um, this is really one of those cases, which is really why I wanted to do this podcast in the first place. It's one of those rare cases, not unknown but rare, where I feel the comic book is almost a more pure apotheosis of the story, even more than the film is. Like the film, like it almost to say is that we often, because obviously film is the art medium of the 20th and 21st century. It's the medium of art that most pervades people's lives, except for maybe music. But having said that, to me, it's almost like the movie existed just so that the comic book could then be done, and the comic book is Bram Stoker's Dracula. And then so instead of like there being a movie and then a comic book adaptation, it's almost like, well, there's the comic book and then there's the movie adaptation, or the movie version, which I think is very funny. I don't know what Coppola would think about that, but that's just my opinion.
Right. No, I get it.
Yeah. Any other impressions? I think we're wrapping up. Any other impressions you want to talk about?
No, I really enjoyed this. I hadn't visited this adaptation again probably since the adaptation came out and the film came out. So it was, and I haven't, other than Hellboy, I have not seen much of Mike's work in recent years. So it was nice to go back and see a big chunk and to see this story. This came out 98.
I believe it was 92, actually.
Oh, 92. That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
I
It's
believe
early 90s.
early 90s.
Yeah, it was fun. I had a lot of fun reading this, and it makes me want to now. And I wish I had viewed the film in conjunction with rereading this. Because I think I would have a little bit more ability to kind of make some of those connections that I was asking about. But I will do my best to fix that in the future.
Oh, not at all. Actually, I think it ended up having you be able to ask me some interesting questions. And I think that was actually a positive. But to speak to what you just talked about, it reminds me, and it makes me hopeful that Mike will take time to draw some things outside. I mean, I love Hellboy, and it's what he's done with Hellboy as a character, as a pop icon is,
Oh yeah, yeah,
incredible beyond measure. But I think what you're saying, and I'm saying it too, is I would love to see him do some more stuff outside of that universe, because he's just so good. He's just so good, and his interpretation of the characters that we love, like Batman or Spider-Man or Rocket Raccoon, are incredible. And I would love to see him return to do things outside of his own expansive universe.
I agree. I think that and this is, this is a great case of catching a guy, an artist, early enough in his evolution that he hadn't become iconic for one particular thing,
Right.
and hadn't focused. So I mean, listen, he and rightfully so, he focused on his own,
Yeah.
his own work, his own character and world, and built it into something amazing. But to see this kind of stuff kind of retroactively before he became so well known for this other thing,
Right.
is really great. And and you're 100% correct. And you always hope that, there are certain artists out there who we both know, who are known for one or two particular things. And so every time you see something new and different from them, it's just so much fun.
Yeah.
And I feel like that so many times an artist will get known for something, and you sort of not necessarily lose that connection, but you forget how well they are able to do things outside of that small little bubble,
Right.
and or of that, of that world that they're working in so wholeheartedly. So yeah, this was a lot of fun. And again, it makes you want to go back and seek out old Mike Mignola stuff and look at more of it.
And I will. When we will.
And I will.
Yeah. So, Steve, thank you very much. Again,
Sure.
Steve, co-founder of Printed in Blood, host of the Cinemental Podcast. Links will be in the YouTube video and forthcoming podcast, which hopefully will be around at the end of February or so. Thank you to our friends at Veganza Media, who will also be, who are in the midst at this moment in time at the end of January of 2023. They are reviewing various different versions of Dracula films, from Nosferatu to the other Nosferatu to Dracula 1931, and they will be getting to this version. And it'll be great to see what the guys have to say about Dracula 1992. Steve, thank you very much, and let's do this again soon.
You bet.